Hello and welcome back to the channel with myself, Gooder, and my good friend Dan.
Who is going to be exploring a lost and found this week.
Good, like it. So we're on to episode
5? I
think five. Episode 5 of season 2, and found. I would say primarily a Sun, or kind of Sun and Jin again.
Well, see, this is one of my first notes actually. So I think that this is the first episode that is legitimately outside the pilot, but is legitimately focused on two characters simultaneously in terms of the flashbacks, because we've had a Sun and Jin kind of episode before, but it was focused on. We've had two Sun and Jin episodes before, but each of them had the perspective of one or the other. So one was a Sun episode, one was a Jin episode. This is the first one where you've definitely got both of their perspectives, and it switches between them throughout the flashbacks.
Yes, yeah, that's right, actually. Yeah, because we had the episode where we had the flashbacks with Boone and Shannon, but they were primarily Boone's point of view. So there's probably that. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, probably is the first time we've had a flashback that's
essentially two characters flashbacks who share a history.
And then the island stuff is pretty much also equally split between the two of them.
Yeah, I mean the flashbacks is the obvious one, but because you've got the groups now split up, and you've got Sun obviously with the main survivors, and Jin with the tail section survivors. Again, it's flicking between their two points of view. So I thought that was interesting that this is the first one we've seen that too. I mean, given the construct of how they do the flashbacks, you could only really, at the moment, do that with couples, or possibly, I guess you could do it like Michael and Walt. So it's just interesting. Yeah, this was different to all the other ones just because of that basic technique.
We've had that thing, haven't we, before, where we've seen different characters in the background of other people's like flashbacks. So in a way, this is actually kind of the same thing for a lot of it, where like there's a couple of times where they pass each other without seeing each other. So that's what we've had before, but we're actually getting like both of their kind of
and it's quite nicely done, because you've got these two separate storylines of them doing independent things, but ultimately they come together at the very end of the flashback sequence, and that's the sort of meeting together of the two. So I quite liked how that was done and how the way it worked.
It's kind of the like romantic comedy meet cute of Sun and Jin, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I'd say we do definitely learn some things about them both, I think, because we definitely get that impression that Jin has always been like super driven to kind of
I think like
improve, I guess, himself. I think, which it seems to be partly driven by like what we've seen before, where he's kind of ashamed of his background.
I think that the Jin side of things is more interesting than the Sun side of things, just because you do get that sort of, he's willing to do everything. He has his discussions with his roommate. I can't remember if he had a name, but the guy who had the destiny. And he's basically putting everything to one side. If love calls, I'm out, or whatever. I can't quite remember what the line is, but totally focused on doing it. He puts up with an awful lot from the guy he goes to the interview of. But I think it's important that he has a line that he's not willing to cross. And I think that's the sort of interesting bit. Like throughout the whole thing, you're seeing one side of him, but then he does take pity on the not so well off chap and his son. And there's a point where he's basically told, like your type or something, and he just quits on the spot, which, given what's been going on today, it's a bit of a unusual situation to see him do that. And I think that's interesting when we know effectively what's coming up for that character, because we know that he effectively commits to working for Sun's dad, and effectively does the same thing where he goes all in terms of this is what he wants to do, and crosses quite a lot of lines for that. It's just that for me that the Jin side of things was really interesting to sort of see this slightly younger version of him, starting out or continuing on in that job, and you kind of wonder, oh, how's he going to end up in the sort of catering business or whatever,
Well, I made a note of that an early line that I liked when I think it's Jin that says it to his housemate, like that it's an important job interview, and that's kind of a nice line that kind of winks at the audience, because it's like, well, he's meaning it in terms of it's important for his career, but it's an important job interview because without this job, he doesn't meet Sun.
Yeah.
And obviously they play a little round a bit. They do a bit of the almost the opposite use of orange from The Godfather, and it doesn't mean that people are dying. They tie it to love, and then it kind of crops up in a few different places, and then finally it's Jin being distracted by the woman in the orange dress.
But no, I definitely liked all of the flashback scenes. I mean, I think the stuff with Sun and the what do you call it? The sort of setup.
Yeah, it's the matchmaking.
That's certainly. And that's there's a bit of me that is curious to know if that's like a standard cultural thing in Korea, or if it's like if Sun's part of a particular bit of that culture that does that sort of thing. Is it a rich person's thing in Korea, or is it just a general Korean thing in general? Is something that I'm sort of a bit curious about.
Yeah, I think it's from what I kind of know, I think it is something that is a bit, I guess it's kind of like the more conservative side of kind of Korean society that is still there, but then arguably it's still kind of here in a lot of Western countries as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's everything you come across, and there's obviously this
like that concept of the debutante's ball and stuff still exists.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that was interesting to me is the fact that you're familiar with it to a greater extent from, I guess, the female perspective, as in, it wasn't overly surprising that Sun was being put in that position by her mom and dad. But it was just interesting that the person on the other side of it, that I can't remember, it's similar to Jay. Was that the guy she was set up with? I feel it was similar to Jin, but it wasn't quite Jay.
That's his name, I don't think, but yeah.
It was interesting that he was basically in the same boat, in that he was being pressured into doing exactly the same thing.
And I think the interesting thing as well for him, I think, well, a couple of things is he's unique in that he's one of the kind of, he's not quite a boyfriend, but he's one of the kind of few kind of romantic interest type characters we've had in the flashbacks who hasn't turned out to be like a massive jerk. Like he's quite a nice guy.
Yeah. I mean, he's quite a nice guy, but he also seemed to like completely misread the situation with Sun. I mean,
yes,
there was no way in my mind. I was like, how on earth did you get, after like a couple of meetings and like you guys hitting it off, did you get to the point where it was like a good idea to tell her, oh yeah, I'm running away to America for someone else? It just seems a little bit.
I think that's the kind of, well, it's quite the nice side of it. It's like he's clearly being forced into having that meeting, but he's clearly kind of not, like, he's doing his like own thing. He's clearly already found like his partner, so he's kind of having to have that, I guess, that fight against his family. Like that's what he wants to do rather than so it's kind of like they're both feeling these pressures, but from different directions. But yes, you would think you would catch on a bit quicker because this lady that you're having some like meals with, like you met in an actual meeting that was for matchmaking, like
yeah, it kind of felt that, like, maybe feel around the situation a little bit longer before sort of dropping the oh yeah, I'm running off to America. But it was good that he wasn't a jerk. Sun's parents, both of them seem overly pushy and overly conservative, I guess, in their attitudes, and so there seems to be an awful lot of parental issues. We get a sort of repeat of the Jin being embarrassed by his father and upbringing, all that sort of thing.
Yes, well, I guess that was kind of the bit I guess I would like to know a bit more about, do a bit of reading about, is like, is there, is this obviously like a fictionalized case, or is there that level of kind of, I guess, classist
Yeah,
bias in Korea? Like, because obviously you mentioned the guy that he was interviewing for, like who runs the hotel, like he was really
oh yeah, he was a
bit on poor people.
Yeah, he was an utter jerk. And yeah, part of the bits that were like I wasn't sure about. I mean, I could understand. You don't agree with me. You can understand that guy's thought process in terms of poor people. In that, he doesn't want that sort of person in his hotel and that sort of thing.
You're trying to maintain the image of the hotel or whatever.
So you can kind of see that, even though he obviously was taking it to some extreme level, and with his associations and various bits. But I guess what's interesting is like he immediately lumped Jin into that group purely because he came from a village rather than being from, I assume, Seoul. And it may well be that that's just sort of the nature of Korea, that if the wealthy side of things just all live in big cities, and small villages is not a thing where you'd come from and therefore be. But yeah, it did seem sort of okay. So you come from a village, therefore you're clearly lower class.
Yeah.
Other than that, in the flashbacks, one of the things I did particularly like was the way they ended up, Jin and Sun end up running into each other. Because I like the fact that, it was quite interesting that they both ended up running into each other because they both effectively walked away from certain things. Like she'd walked away from whatever the guy's name was. He'd walked away from the job. Both of them sort of seemingly trying to seek something new. And that's when they ran into each other, literally and figuratively. I think that's all I had on the flashbacks. But I like the flashbacks in this case really link in well with what's going on the island in both groups, because of course we're following Jin and Sun.
Yes, I think it ties in as well because obviously Sun's side of things is, she's upset about losing her ring. And that's partially because she thinks that something bad has happened to.
Yeah.
And then, of course, like, you have to try and remember that when they've parted, they've actually not parted on the best of terms.
Yeah, and that was what you sort of kind of have to sort of go backwards a bit to try and sort of remember exactly how it panned out, because they departed like the end of last season, which is now 6 or so episodes ago. And it was a case of where they had that big fight. He was leaving, but then they almost, but not quite, reconciled. And it became like Jin wasn't leaving just to be away. It was kind of Jin was leaving to save Sun.
Yes. He gives him like the page of translations.
Yeah. And so, there was the bits and pieces of that. And then you've got the facts that, was it last episode or 2 episodes ago, they find the bottle, and that's caused the anxiety in the first place, with Sun thinking, oh, they must have capsized, fallen in, something's gone wrong because they shouldn't be back here. So you've got all those sort of building blocks about it. What's kind of interesting, and I noted this down, was that, like, given all that's been taking place the last few episodes, there is literally no presence of the Swan or any of the Dharma stuff in this episode whatsoever. I mean, you don't even see the inside of the Swan in this episode. So it really is sort of stepped aside from the last few, which...
Yes, and I think thinking back when obviously everything was, first premiering, I think that's one of the aspects that I seem to remember some people I used to talk to about it used to find frustrating, and then you'd get something like the installation introduced, and then people just want to know more about that, like, straight away. But obviously then the show kind of then spends some time looking at some of the other stuff, and it's like, and it's one of those things, I guess, where I never really kind of, I can understand why people would find that frustrating, but then I'm also like, well, what do you expect the show to do? It's not just going to run with one plot line until that's finished and then go back.
That can,
pick up another plot line.
if you've got all these plot lines going on and all of these characters that you're exploring, you need to spend, you will naturally jump between them. That's the thing. So I certainly didn't have any. I didn't have any issue with the fact that we didn't feature the Swan or Dharma at all. But it was just interesting that it was literally like they didn't just like reduce the level of Dharma-ness. It was very much just like there's literally nothing in it at all. There wasn't even a bit of someone walking through the Swan or.
Yeah, I don't think it's even literally mentioned at all.
No,
I think in the next episode, which is also kind of similar to this, like there's a mention of it. Like, there's one that refers to it, but this one there's just no mentions at all.
Yep. But no, so on the island you've got this. Effectively, the big symbol of the episode is the lost ring, and then which Sun loses and isn't sure where it was. Because she lost it last episode, was it when she was? She
notices she's missing it in this episode,
but she actually lost it an episode or so ago.
And it turns out that she's buried it. She's actually buried it with the bottle. And basically, so Sun's side of this, it's her kind of looking for the ring, and we have a series of scenes where one of the other characters comes, and talks to her for a little bit.
Yeah, and because there's 4 people who come up to sort of give advice. There's Jack, Hurley, Locke, and Kate. And Jack comes up and basically gives a good story, which was utterly stupid.
Yeah, it's a story that kind of goes nowhere. I mean, I guess it's a confirmation. We get a real firm confirmation that somebody. Well, I guess we already know, but this is Jack definitely telling somebody else.
Yeah,
been married.
Yeah, although it's interesting that, like, he doesn't at any point say what's happened, or even that he's no longer married, because he sort of finishes it saying, "Oh, it's rocking around in my sock drawer somewhere," which you could take either way. I think the main thing I got from his sort of story about how he, tore apart the garbage and the plumbing and all this sort of stuff, and ultimately failed. It seemed almost like really bad bedside manner. It's like the classic. It's everyone does it, but it's the classic thing whereby someone's going through something, so you immediately go through your own experiences. But it's like you should have thought this through, because basically you got to the end of that and said, "Oh yeah, I had to buy a new one." Which is like the worst thing to hear at that point. It's like, if the story was, "Oh, I tore all this and I eventually found it," then that's a sort of story that is helpful.
If it was, you kind of half expect it to be, it's one of those stories where like he says like, "Oh, I ripped through all the garbage or whatever," and then it turned out to be in my pocket or something. Yeah. But no, it's just like, "Oh, I just bought a new one."
Yeah.
Which also casts, I think, some doubt on his relationship with his wife, because he's not told her, he's just replaced it without telling her.
Yeah.
But yeah, from Sun's point of view, that's not a helpful story to
No, it was very much doesn't matter how hard you try, you can sometimes end up losing stuff anyway. It's like,
and I think you can see it on her face as well. At the end of the scene, she's like, "Why did you tell me that? Like, what was the point of that story?"
Yeah, you then had, it was then Hurley with the dog thing, which again, this was just sort of it ultimately ended up not being helpful, but it was quite a funny sort of little bit, and did at least sort of I guess give you a little bit more sort of character insight and Sun, because they have the nice little story about how Jin had bought her the dog, and the name of the dog that meant kiss, which I can't remember the name that they actually had. Which is a nice little. At least that has a nice little moment, even though it was a fruitless endeavor.
It's like, how long were they prepared to sit and wait for the dog to do its business? That was my question.
Yeah. Then you had Locke, which is probably the most
his kind of sage ways. He was probably the most kind of comforting.
He was the most kind of comforting, but it was also probably the most sort of poignant and fitting in with the sort of overall episode theme, because he sort of has he has the line that he was not lost anymore, which I think is the sort of, and that immediately makes you start thinking of, well, the show's called Lost. They're all lost, but he's the one who isn't lost. That's interesting.
Yeah, and they have there's that nice exchange, isn't it, where he says, "I'm not lost anymore."
Yeah.
That's just like, how did you do that? And he's like, well, same as everything else that gets lost. I stopped looking.
Yeah. Which is exactly how Sun ends up finding it as well at the end of the episode. It's when she's not looking for the ring is when they actually find it. But yeah, there's a few other, because like that little interaction covers a few little bits and pieces. So we had when was the lock episode? Was that 2 episodes ago or 1 episode ago?
A couple episodes ago, yeah.
Episodes ago was the lock one.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it was episode 3, wasn't it? The lock one. And you had the conversation with Sun sort of saying, "Oh, I never see you angry." And that was the bits that we sort of focused on in the lock flashbacks before, that he clearly did have anger issues. So that was quite nice to sort of cover off.
I guess it also, thinking about it, also ties in to Jin and Sun, because like Jin has kind of found his new purpose after he gives up, like he gave up with the watch thing. So that's like him kind of not bothering to search for whatever purpose that was supposed to give him anymore. He's given up on that and become happier, albeit, kidnapped.
And then you get after Locke, you get Kate, and that's where you get the sort of resolution of that little storyline. And again, it's a very good like insight into the various different characters almost, because you've had Jack, who the thing about Jack is he's constantly trying to help, and he sort of tells the story about how he's obsessive, he couldn't fail, and all this sort of thing. But actually, he seems to have a very terrible bedside manner, which is something we've noticed before, that actually that wasn't a particularly helpful story. Hurley's got the sort of does have some practicality about him, and at the same time, it's just all like it's quite a funny interaction, which is what we get a lot of from Hurley. Locke's the sort of sage, oh yes, this fits in with the whole big themes and this sort of stuff going on. And then we learn a bit more, like the last bit, we learn more, I think, about Kate than we do from Sun, because we sort of learn like when she starts frantically digging it up and getting the messages out, and she's looking for a message from Sawyer. You're sort of learning something there, because it's quite it's not a reaction you immediately expect from Kate.
I think it's, for me, that little moment with Kate, like I can understand what they're doing with it, but it just doesn't quite land.
Well, and that's probably it. Like to me, it was like it seemed. I think I wrote down it seemed extreme, and possibly it's more that it just seemed unexpected, because I guess what it's trying to do is this is Kate now effectively being in the loop that something may have happened to the raft, and it's quite clear that whilst he probably cares a little bit about Michael, Walt, and Jim, it's quite clear that it's Sawyer that is the interesting bit. And that's sort of an additional step than what we've seen before, in that they've been bouncing around each other for a long time, and they've had this sort of somewhat flirtatious, somewhat antagonistic relationship with each other. And this is the point where it's like, oh, okay, there clearly is supposed to be something more in Kate's mind towards Sawyer than we've necessarily fully got the impression of.
Yes. Yeah, I think, that's obviously what they've gone for. I think for me, it just doesn't quite work yet for me, because you've not really seen any signs of that before this. It's all that kind of, there's been, I guess, that kind of sparking, but it's all been quite.
Yeah, I mean, I think the closest that we've got time was the.
It's the one where they find the case in the pond.
They've only found the case, whatever episode that was.
They're being very flirty at the start of that, but then obviously then it gets quite quite tense after that.
And it's interesting that the thing that she was upset about was the fact that she'd never said goodbye. That was the thing she said, and I guess that's what she's looking for in terms of going through the notes, because Sawyer never wrote a note.
So I guess my assumption, I might have to go back and check things. My assumption was that she was trying to go through and find one that she'd written perhaps to him.
Oh, okay.
'Cause
Yes.
I think that she would know that he would be likely to go through and read them.
Right. Okay. Yeah. See, yeah, my assumption was that she was looking for something from him. That was, but yeah, it could well be that she's. Apart from that, we've got the other side of the island. I'm going to assume it's the other side of the island with
Yeah,
the tail group.
yeah. I mean, there's quite a
Um,
lot in this, I think.
yeah, this is probably the bit that's got like the most like all of the rest of the stuff, the flashbacks and the main survivor group. It's all been character driven. I don't think there's anything in there that you got lots of insight into the various characters and specifically Jin and Sun. But there's nothing that progressed any of the plot lines or mistakes or anything like that.
Lots of TM.
Yeah. Well, the tail group, you do get quite a few interesting things. First of all, you've set there's a mechanism set in motion, which is they're going to go to where the other survivors are. So, in X number of episodes, the groups are going to come together. So that's the sort of start bit. You get an awful lot of foreshadowing, I guess. Is it foreshadowing? Or foreshadowing about what's happened in the past? Is that right? I don't know if that's foreshadowing or foreshadowing about what you're going to learn about what happened in the past.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Not a foreshadowing of what has happened, but we start to get some hints about what has happened to them, and we start to find out a bit more like what they've been through and what they know as well, because there's a bit of dialogue with Libby and like Mike, she's like, don't go that way, and Michael's like, why? And he's like, and she's, well, that's the direction that they come from.
And
obviously that's what sets Michael running off that way. And we get a sight of Goodwin, who has been horribly murdered out in the jungle.
Yeah, I mean, and that's an interesting one to me because I didn't quite get so you've got, I don't know, is there about 10 of them left of the tail survivors? There's how many there are? They started off with 23.
Yeah,
there's now maybe 10. It might be a little bit less of them left. The others, the ones they've lost have clearly either been abducted or buried or whatever. But the fact that this Goodwin guy was left out in the open, sort of big stab, was sort of kind of interesting to me. And I was just sort of, that's, why is he being left in that state? Because you'd think that, given what we've seen the other survivors do, who generally is, someone's got killed, go and bury him, which seems the sort of standardized thing that you'd expect most groups to do rather than leave a dead body sort of out there, particularly with a knife stuck in it, I think. So I feel that there's like an interesting story to be had from this Goodwin body, was my takeaway on that. It's like, okay, what's gone on there? Was he left out to sort of as a warning, the others going, we're coming for you, and this is that sort of thing.
I think it's made clear, isn't it, that the tail section folks feel much less safe moving about in the jungle than the other survivors. We get a full proper introduction of Mr. Echo.
Yep.
Who is awesome.
Yeah, he seems cool. He makes weapons. He seems to track and all this sort of stuff. He's like, super lock in terms of that side of things. He had one line that I've written down. I can't understand what it is. I'm going to have to try and figure out what he said about this, because I've got written down, what is worse than being married?
Oh, right. Yes. Yeah. It is a clue to something that you find out about him.
Because I'm just trying to remember the context. I wrote it down thinking that seems like a very odd.
Yes, because
So he's talking to and says, so he's sort of going, are you married? And through the bad conversations, he gets that. Oh yeah, he was married with his son. And Jin asked him, are you married? And he says,
worse.
Which is, oh no, worse. And you kind of go, worse? Okay, what's that about?
Yeah. Yes, it will make sense.
Okay. Yeah, I even written it down just to like, what's worse than being married?
Yeah, have a think and see what you come up with, and see if it matches what the outcome is.
Yeah. So if someone asks you, are you married? And someone says, no, worse. It's just like, I'm gonna have to think about that. But yeah, he was interesting, and I liked how they used him. So that as you said, oh, like he's pretty badass. He seems pretty cool. You know, he's doing all these. You know, he made the big stabby thing that he gives to Sawyer. He clearly knows what he's doing. He's clearly a big, huge guy who can take care of himself and all this sort of stuff. And yet, he's the one who's basically gives you the narration about the others and how scared of the others he is, which immediately, you know, sets them up.
Yeah.
You know, if you've got here's a guy that we're portraying as an ultimate badass, and he's like, I'm really scared about these other guys. You're like, oh, okay. So they're once again being pitched pretty high up, and you get lots of little hints, like he says at one stage, that they don't leave any tracks. So the fact they found some tracks means it's got to be Michael.
Yeah.
Like, okay, that's it. That's again sort of hinting that they've got some kind of abilities or training or something about them that's almost slightly superhuman, which was what we had with whatever the Canadian guy's name was.
Ethan.
Ethan, that was it. Yep.
Yeah. And I think, and it's fascinating as well because we get a glimpse of some of the others because as they pass.
Yeah.
Mr. Echo and Jin in the jungle. And and the notable thing is we see their feet and they're all barefoot.
Yeah.
The notable thing is at the end of the line, there appears to be a child because there's somebody carrying a soft toy.
Yeah, that was it. I mean, you get this, they're hiding in the bush and you see that the knees go by. And as you say, the things I noticed was they're all bare feet, which is interesting. They all look like they're kind of dirty or disheveled from what you could see of them. And then you've got, I wasn't 100% sure if it was supposed to be a child or if it was supposed to be just someone carrying a teddy bear, but that was, it was like, couldn't really tell from that perspective. But that feeds back into the sort of suspicions I've had before about they've got some kind of interest in kids. Because obviously they've taken Walt now. Yeah. So you kind of think, oh, okay, is have they got a teddy bear for their little stash of kids, or are the kids being made to work for them? What's going on with that?
Are they just into teddy bears?
Yeah. Is it like, yes, they want all the teddy bears, and kids have teddy bears, so they must kidnap all kids? But yeah, that was the sort of main bits I think you get from that bit. You get a few other little bits and pieces. Like I feel like Sawyer and Anna are kind of doing the Sawyer and Kate thing in the way they're sort of needling each other.
Yeah.
Because they have the bit of banter yet again about being married. Is one of the bits that goes on about. You've got the nice little bit about Jin kicking ass at fishing, sort of showing them all up.
Yeah.
You guys don't know how to fish.
Well, it's one of those nice little moments, isn't it? Because they're doing the thing like I think it's Anna and Bernard, isn't it? They're like, come over here, come help us. Hey, come help us. Yeah. Like we as an audience know that they're about to be shown up. Like we already know it because we've already seen this like play out with like and other people before. So it's that kind of comedy moment, but we know it's coming.
Yeah. And then you've got the other bit that's I guess going on is the fact that Michael's run off after attempted to get to the others because he's after Walt, and that again it's telling you something. It's putting you in his creating a sense of what's in his mind and his focus on it. But it's interesting that he does eventually concede and comes back with.
Yes. He starts off trying to discourage people from following him because he's like I've got to go do this, but I don't want you to follow me because this is my thing.
Yeah.
But it's actually Mr. Echo in the end who kind of manages to kind of fully convince him.
Yeah.
Like there's no point going by yourself. And again, get reference to like I think Mr. Echo Scott says like they've taken other people as well. Like they take so much,
and you won't find them unless they want to be found. That seems to be. I think the only other thing I had noted down the thing about the Destiny book in the flashback, but that, I'm not really sure if that's something significant or not.
I guess it ties into a greater theme that we've discussed a few times of like how much is Destiny a thing? I guess in the world of Lost.
Yeah, is it?
Because we're seeing some things where things seem to be drawing people together to the island. And here, we have the discussion of the Destiny book. I guess it's similar to kind of horoscope type things.
Yeah, I'd assume so.
And obviously, Jin makes fun of it, but then it turns out to.
Yeah, I assume it's sort of supposed to be astrology or something like that. But yeah.
I think the only other kind of thing, Locke is talking to Sun, and she's like, "Oh, did you see?" And Locke's like, "Did I see you pull your garden apart?" No.
Yeah.
He has this nice way of kind of saying that he's seen, but he kind of
Yeah.
immediately disarms it by kind of joking about it, and I think says that he wishes he had his own garden to rip up.
Yeah. Yeah. What as a sort of final thought about this episode? It's interesting what you were saying earlier about how this is the sort of episode that people found frustrating because it didn't continue on with like the same storyline. And I do wonder, therefore, if like I enjoyed this episode and thought, oh, you're learning a lot about the characters and all the other bits.
Yeah.
There's not like it's got tension, it's got things still going on about it. The sort of traipsing through the woods trying to avoid the others is sort of interesting. So yeah, there's just a bit of me that's like, okay. I wonder if it's like things like this that some people like and some people don't like, and that's.
Yeah, I think this is probably the point where if you're not kind of really on into the side of it where you enjoy it because of the characters. I guess by this point, if you just kind of mainly focus on the inverted commas plot side of it, I guess this is kind of the point where you would start to probably get frustrated because they're not advancing a lot here.
Yeah, I could certainly see that in that we're now we must be at like almost 30 episodes in.
Yeah,
and it's like, well, we've only just sort of opened up the hatch and we haven't really learned anything, and it's all very confusing. That's it. We still haven't figured out who these others are and what they're up to and all this.
So yeah, so I can certainly see why, like, some people would start to get frustrated with it at this point. But yeah, that was episode 5, and found. So next week we've got ballet, horrible mothers.
Yep.
And yeah, shocking violence.
Dun dun dun.